full-time Muslim chaplain and Muslim Life coordinator, and I direct the Muslim Life program out of Princeton University's Office of Religious Life. The Muslim Life program has been around for about 7 years on this campus, and we're always very excited to be hosting these type of conversations. From the very beginning, one of our missions has been to engage in critical conversations around Islam, Muslim societies, contemporary issues, and we do this through a whole host of things by bringing academics and artists and activists to this campus to engage in a wide variety of questions and issues. A little bit earlier up on the screen, you had some of our upcoming events and some of the events that we've had just this past semester. And before you leave, I hope you'll join our email list, and I hope that you'll take some propaganda material out on the table. They'll tell you about our upcoming events and how to keep in touch with our program. We're really excited to have you all here. We're really excited to have with us today Shaykh Abdullah bin Hamid Ali. He's one of the most respected Muslim scholars in America today, and his articles and his lectures have been widely disseminated and followed by Muslims throughout the country and abroad as well. And I'll say a few more words about him in particular, but at this moment I actually want to turn over to my good friend Khalil Mohsin, who's here from Lamppost Productions, and we're doing this event in particular in conjunction with Lamppost Productions. And he's going to say a few words about his organization, so you all know what that's about, and then I'll more formally introduce Shaykh Abdullah bin Hamid Ali, and then we'll start our program. There'll be a lecture, a presentation, and then there'll be plenty of time for question and answer. So for now, if you can pay attention to Khalil.
Thank you, Imam Suhaib. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome our honored guests to this beautiful event. My name is Khalil, and I represent the Lamppost Education Initiative, or Lamppost Productions, which is our website that you'll find us on. We passed out some information and flyers on us. The Lamppost Education Initiative, our objective is to provide Muslims and non-Muslims with a scholarly voice of Islamic scholars, so that you can find an authentic Islamic position on numerous issues of today. So today, for example, we're talking about Jihad and modern violence, which has been in the news. We've also talked about things on our website like police brutality from an Islamic perspective, and the view that Islamic experts have on these very pressing issues in our society that affects all Americans, Muslims, non-Muslims as well. We are a nonprofit organization, so your donations will be very much appreciated. We can definitely use it, but we are working strong and hard to provide an Islamic and an authentic Islamic voice to these particular issues. So we are grateful that you can come up. We're very grateful to Imam Suhaib Sultan and the efforts that he's putting forth here at Princeton, again, to provide an Islamic light on issues that all of us can share in and identify and appreciate. So we'd like to thank you once again for your attendance. We'd like to thank Imam Sultan and the Muslim Life organization for allowing us to participate in this conversation that we are all engaged in, and we really hope that you can benefit from it. Outside on the table, you'll find, if you're interested, some of Shaykh Abdullah's books. He has a book that he's written or translated from a great Islamic scholar named Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali. He translated his very last work, and it's a work on Muslim belief. So if you're interested, that's available for you. But thank you, and that's it.
Welcome. Thank you so much, Khalil. So just to kick off our program, I want to introduce more formally Shaykh Abdullah bin Hamid Ali. His biography is quite extensive, and if you go to Lamppost website, you can read it in full. But I just want to highlight a few things. The first is that Shaykh Abdullah is a senior faculty member of Zaytuna College. And Zaytuna College is the first Muslim liberal arts college founded here in the United States. It's based in Hayward, California, or not in Hayward, California anymore, that's where it was initially, but now it's right off of the campus of Berkeley in California. And you have someone who works for Zaytuna here, so she can offer you more propaganda about that later. He specializes in Islamic law and legal philosophy. He is a graduate of the prestigious Al-Qarawiyyin University of Fez, Morocco. And he has an MA in ethics and social theory from the Graduate Theological Union. And he's pursuing a PhD in cultural and historical studies of religion. Shaykh Abdullah has been writing many articles. More than 40 articles have been published. And among these articles is a very important article that's maybe very relevant to this topic on preserving the freedom for faith, reevaluating the politics of compulsion. And you can read many of his essays on Lamppost, and you can see some of his books outside. So without any further ado, I want to welcome Shaykh Abdullah and thank him so much for coming.
And peace be to all of you. I guess it would be a good way to begin by first thanking the hosts of this program, those who are connected with the university, the Muslim Students Association, Muslim Life Organization, Lamppost Productions, and then also would like to thank all of you for coming out here. Coming in, I had imagined that I would have a room that would be like a majority of Muslims, and then there probably would be some non-Muslims here. I'm assuming that most of you are not Muslim, so I don't want to sort of be too presumptuous about that, but I'm assuming that most of you are not Muslim, and that's a good thing, and I'm hoping that this particular presentation will help you to better, if not understand the Muslims, at least I hope that it would give you some additional things to think about and reflect upon when you see the imagery of Muslims and violence, among other things, on the television screen. We were speaking earlier, about the book that's available. That particular book is probably not very relevant for non-Muslims, just so as you know. It's a historical book related to dialectical theology. It probably won't be very interesting to you, but there hopefully we'll have more materials in the future if we have more events like this. So the title of this particular lecture presentation is Islam, Jihad, and Violence. And I imagine that most of you are here, of course, to learn what one particular person, who is me, has to say about these concepts, have an interest in knowing if there's anything new, that there will be anything new to learn about this. And I do applaud you for your courage to come out and to try to at least get something from the horse's mouth, I guess you would say, about what Islam may or may not have to say. And I also would imagine that what is very prominent in everyone's mind is the problem with the group called ISIS or ISIL. And so hopefully there will be some things that I offer will to put ISIS in perspective as well. And so the first question here, I don't have my glasses to see the screen, this important question of does Islam promote violence? Now, this is a question which has been asked in the liberal media recently. As we know, there was a somewhat of a controversial exchange on Bill Meyer's show, and then also in CNN, the liberal media have been asking this question about whether or not Islam promoted violence. And I think it's important in order for us to try to answer that question honestly and objectively is, first and foremost, we have to ask ourselves, what are the sources of Islam? That how will we really know whether or not Islam promotes violence? We have to ask ourselves about the sources first and foremost. What are the sources of Islam? The sources of Islam first and foremost is the Quran itself, and the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad as well. Now, in addition to those sources, there are these additional sources which are connected with Islam's legal legacy. It's the legal tradition itself, where it had happened historically that as we get further away from the prophetic era, that a number of law schools, theological schools, and schools of mysticism develop in Islamic history. And then eventually what happens is that those particular schools and the teachings of those schools become incorporated into or included among what we consider to be the sources of Islam. But there had always been a distinction made between Islam as passed down by the Prophet himself, and also taught or communicated to Muslims through the Quran, and what had developed later in Islamic history. But among some Muslims, what had occurred as well was that there was somewhat of an equation developed between, or a type of approach to the sources of Islam, such that those which were not Quranic and that those which were not originating from the prophetic example, that those at times gained a certain type of importance over the actual Quran and others. Because to help us understand why at times we find Muslims saying different things, this is an extremely important thing to understand, that Muslims are not monolithic, just as no people are monolithic. And just as at times we may distance ourselves or disabuse ourselves from certain ideological trends or movements in the Islamic community, that ultimately we can only represent ourselves realistically. Now, one way to distance ourselves to say, well, those people are not even Muslims, so just ignore them, what they say. That I don't like that approach personally, because especially for a non-Muslim, because non-Muslims really can't say who's Muslim, who's not Muslim. We really can't say, because really a non-Muslim just say, well, if they say they're Muslims, I assume that they're Muslim. Or it may happen as well that a non-Muslim may perceive of a certain type of person as being an authentic Muslim and another not being an authentic Muslim, and we'll come to that as well. So we have to begin there. What are the Islamic sources? And I would say that the true sources of the Islamic teachings are the Quran and the prophetic model, or we call the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, because God communicated the message to him, and he communicated to his companions, and then his own practices, his statements, his descriptions, his authorizations of things were preserved and passed down to us. So that's an important thing for us to begin with. Now, when we move to the Quran, begin with the Quran, we need to understand about the Quran that the Quran is a book which has a number of different teachings, that the Quran has a history, that the Quran was a book which was revealed over a period of 23 years, that the Prophet Muhammad didn't receive the Quran in one single installment, that the Quran over a period of 23 years had been revealed piece by piece, and once we reached the end of the life of the Prophet, that this particular book contains 114 chapters, and among the verses, we have about 6,235 verses in the Quran. Of those verses, 350 of them pertain to law. Right? So out of over 6,000, about 350 of them pertain to law. And so often we get into these conversations about what is Sharia, for instance, the Sharia law, that we need to be afraid of Muslims because of Sharia law. Right? And when you read the Quran, we have to be afraid of it because it's all this stuff about law, these very barbaric and antiquated, old-fashioned, outdated laws, corporal punishment, among other things, that we need to be very fearful of. But in reality, when we look at the Quran itself, and we can compare the number of verses pertaining to law and those that pertain to other issues, such as his basic teachings of ethics, morality, things like being kind to poor people and the orphan, maintaining ties of kinship to your family, being charitable, being dutiful to God. That there's so many different things. There are different parables, stories, many different lessons to be taken. But even if you look at the 350 verses, that of the 350 verses, only about 30 of them pertain to the penal code, right? So if you're taking all of that into consideration right from the beginning, and you are asked the question, does Islam promote violence, right? And you actually find that, and if we're focusing on the penal code in particular, that only 30 of over 6,000 verses of the Quran deal with things about the penal code, then it's hard to say that the Quran teaches violence to begin with. Now, of course, the penal code is just one aspect of the Quran, as we know. But there is the teaching about jihad in Islam and the Quran as well. And what we have to understand about jihad is jihad is not the same as fighting. Right? There's a word that is utilized in the Quran for fighting. It's called qital. It's actually mentioned in the Quran. And fighting is also been authorized in certain instances. But jihad itself is a much broader term. That jihad is a word which means struggle. All throughout the Quran, anytime the word jihad is utilized as a struggle with oneself and with one's wealth. That when God describes the believers, they're people who do jihad with themselves and with their wealth. So that you struggle with your urges, you struggle with your proclivities and your biases and your vices, right? But then also with your wealth, you struggle against, the urge to be stingy, for instance, right? That you struggle with those different things, and so those should be taken into consideration. Another thing that we want to consider when we reflect upon this question is the very fact that of these 114 chapters of the Quran, we call surahs, that every single one of them begins with the statement, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, most compassionate, most merciful. Right? Every single chapter begins with that, with the exception of one chapter. Chapter 9 of the Quran, Surah At-Tawbah or Surah Al-Bara'ah, which does not begin with that statement. Now, some of our scholars have said the reason why that particular chapter does not begin with that statement has to do with the very content of that particular chapter, the overall content of the chapter, which is fundamentally about fighting. It's about fighting. So you don't preface a chapter that's giving you guidance about what to do with your enemies with, in the name of God, most compassionate, most merciful, and then you start talking about fighting and killing and things like that. But all the other chapters begin with that particular expression. And in that chapter as well is a very famous verse that is often quoted, which says, فَقْتُلُوا الْمُشْرِكِينَ, kill the idolaters, right? Kill the idolaters. And everything has its context, but that is the surah, but that verse is mentioned. That verse, and we can deal with that later on. I know there definitely will be questions about that, but just to understand, it doesn't mean what you think it means. Doesn't mean what you think it means. We can come back to that. I don't want to deal with it right now. Another thing which is important about this as well is that in the area of hadith studies, that is to say, the area where we learn about the life of the Prophet Muhammad and the type of things that he said, communicated, his actions, the things that he did, in this particular area, that in the hadith science, in the Muslim world historically, in terms of the tradition, when a person begins to study the prophetic tradition, there is a famous report, prophetic tradition, which is learned. It's the very first hadith that is typically learned. And this hadith is the hadith of Ar-Rahimun, Yarhamuhum Ar-Rahman. The hadith which says that those who are merciful will be shown mercy by the All-Merciful One. Irhamu man fil ard, yarhamkum man fis sama. So be merciful to those who are on earth, those who are in heaven will be merciful to you. So there's a very strong emphasis on mercy. There's a very famous hadith or report or prophetic tradition as well that says that God said, "Inna rahmati taghlibu ghadabi," that my mercy conquers my wrath. Right, so Islam is, when Muslims are a community, is already adjusted to the concept and idea that the most outstanding of God's attributes is the attribute of mercy. That mercy is a very significant part of the teachings of the Quran, the teaching of our Prophet Muhammad. The Quran says that he was sent, rahmatul lil alameen, as a mercy for all creatures. That's what the Quran teaches us about our Prophet. So these should be taken into consideration as we think about and reflect upon that question. Does Islam teach violence? Well, I mean, yeah, there may be some verses or some reports that may speak about violence, contextualized or not contextualized. Yes, they are there, they do exist. But to say that Islam promotes violence because of those few isolated, right, texts, or we could text, that in itself I don't believe would be a sincere or a very fair statement to make. Okay, so we got that out of the way, but then the next question becomes, okay, well, all right, if that's the case, why, or, well, first and foremost, do Muslims really have an image problem? You know, and if they do, why? Why did they have an image problem? I would say, yeah, Muslims do have an image problem. We do. We have an image problem. I look at, you know, there's an image problem. This is the type of imagery we see, especially nowadays on a regular basis. We see this type of imagery. But who's to blame? I would say that it's a shared blame. It's not just Muslims. It's not just non-Muslims. It's Muslims as well. Like, who controls the imagery? Now you may see this image, but these are images that Muslims are not posting. Muslims are not posting these images, right? At least most of us are not. There may be some Muslims who would like to post those images. There are. You know, they send you a video beheading somebody, right? Yeah. But sending a video that beheads you, this beheading someone is, you know, is not to be interpreted as something that is endorsed by Islam. I mean, there's nothing in Islam that says behead people if they, you know, what it says, those who insult Islam. There's no verse, there's no prophetic statement, there's nothing like that. But you have the images. So part of it is because of those who control the imagery, they themselves, they perpetuate these things. Now, sometimes you might ask the question, why? And I would say that, okay, well, perhaps we may not be able to know precisely, but I can give you a general impression at times about why, the why. Now, very soon we'll have the midterm elections, or the elections will coming up next month, right? And one thing, a pattern, I would ask all of you to try to observe. Try to observe this pattern, that practically every year and a half, or even sometimes 2 years, or sometimes a little bit more, but usually at least a year passes. There's a very major campaign that starts, anti-Muslim campaign that develops. Right? It starts. And we're having one right now. I believe that once the elections are over, it will subside a little bit. Well, not a little bit, a lot. You might still hear some things, but most of it's going to be gone from the media because elections are over. But another year, let another year go by, once we're coming closer to another election cycle, you'll see these images popping up again. And that's not a conspiracy theory. Just observe it, right? Because what I believe is what's happened is that this is a game that some people play. That they appeal to our biases, our bigotry, they appeal to those different things, to our ignorance, right, of other people, and in order to hide the major problems that are happening in the country or around the world, right? Yeah. Who's responsible for your problems? Well, it's the Muslims, right? They may not say that at times directly, but Just observe that. So the imagery, again, Muslims don't control imagery, but I also say that Muslims share in the blame as well. That Muslims share part of the blame as well, and for more than one reason. So when we think about the Muslims and how a blame is assigned with Muslims, we have to think about Muslims in two different sectors or sections, two different types of Muslims. Though the learning class and then the commoners. The learning class and the commoners. And I say that both the learning and the commoners share the degree of blame in terms of the negative impression that many people have of Muslims and Islam, and the anxiety that people experience about Islam. Right? So we know that, yes, a part of it is the imagery. Those are typically we still call non-Muslims. But then there are Muslims as well. And we have to look at them this way, at least in my opinion. So the problem with the scholars, and when I say the scholars, I don't mean all the scholars, of course, but I do mean a significant number of Muslim scholars. That I believe first and foremost that one of the problems with many of the scholars is that many of them, they place value on the historical sectarianism or partisanship that exists between Muslims. That many scholars are committed to the Sunni Shiite divide, right? Or the divide between Sufi Wahhabi divide. That many of them are very steeped in that, and they feel that they would be compromising their principles for them to try to work to overcome or to let go of that. Now that has a very bad effect on the masses, because generally the masses are simply following an interpretation of a certain group of scholars or a certain sect of Islam. Right? This is why we find confused pictures. So that's one of the problems. Another of the problems I see is there is a reluctance to revise, or I say recharacterize, certain aspects of the Islamic legacy. So for instance, apostasy law. Now, apostasy law, the law of apostasy that has been passed down to us through Islamic jurisprudence is that if a person leaves Islam, like for instance, you just don't believe it anymore. I don't believe it, I don't feel it in my heart. The old teaching is that, okay, if that person is discovered to have left Islam, then you execute the person. Now, I'm not suggesting that that particular judgment is wrong with regard to a particular type of person. I'm suggesting that the characterization of, or the definition of the act for which the individual is told to be executed for should be redefined as defection. Now, for instance, in those times, it was a different world. There was tribal communities. And at any time, people could simply invade and pillage and destroy and rape and do all types of different things, right? Yeah, and so communities were very cohesive, and so their religious structure as well, it wasn't just this idea of a separation between church and state as we know, no, but it was like, the political order and the social order were part of their religion as well. So if a person left one group and went to the side of the enemy, right, of this particular other group, then those individuals were a threat to the old community, right? And so being a threat because this other group that I've gone to join were threatening my existence, right? Then it made sense, in my opinion, for this idea of a person being executed for leaving. Now, when we look at the Prophet Muhammad, there's a statement was attributed to him where it says that he said, "Kill whoever changes his deen." And the word deen is often translated as religion. And I'm going to bring us to a quote from Karen Armstrong I don't believe that deen is the correct, a religion is the correct translation of that particular word, and she agrees with me on this issue. Not that we had a conversation, but I've been saying this to some people for some time, that the word deen, which it should not be translated as religion, and so to a defector, right, what threatens his new community, the Prophet Muhammad himself, even though this is considered to be a canonical report and believe that he did say it, that when we look at his own actions, even in spite of him saying it, he never killed an individual just because they left Islam. And there were people during his time who left Islam. There were people who were once following him. Like, for instance, they migrated to Abyssinia, to Ethiopia. They were fleeing from the idolaters in Mecca. And some of them became Christian. Some of his companions, his followers, became Christian. He didn't send anybody and say, go knock them off. Go handle things. There were people who left Islam during the lifetime of the Prophet Muhammad. If anyone had been executed, it was only in response to some other misdeed that they were guilty of, such as murder. That it was the law of equality. You kill someone, you can be killed for killing that person. So what's happened is that this level of, because of a refusal to try to redefine or recharacterize what apostasy is, which in reality is defection, right? That this has led to a type of hyper-legalism to the extent that it has minimized the role of the Prophet himself in the lives of the Muslims. That we get so sort of frozen upon the traditional or classical legal teachings that we forget that the true exemplar, par excellence, is the Prophet himself, right? That religion is defined by him. It is him about which it was said his conduct was the Quran. Kana khuluqul Quran. Kana Quran yamshi. He was the Quran walking, right? That's what we learned about the character of the Prophet Muhammad. The Quran says you have an excellent exemplar in the Prophet Muhammad himself. So this is what we know about him. But because some people, again, when we go back to the sources of Islam, when you include these additional sources, these jurisprudential sources, as among the sources of Islam, that some people have marginalized, indirectly, unintentionally marginalized the importance of the character and the example of the Prophet Muhammad in the lives of Muslims. And so, and one way of doing that is by validating all standard opinions and all of the accepted schools of law without context, right? And this is one thing that develops. So Sunnis have 4 schools of law, and if you speak with someone who's a sort of hyper-legalist, who has a sort of hyper-legalist type of orientation, that they'll tell you that all the schools are valid, any opinion, whether the standard opinions are valid, even if they may be very problematic. Yes?
So you think that back then it was wise to kill someone if they wanted to leave your tribe?
Well, I believe that in the context of a world where an individual leaves his home community and then decides to join an enemy combatant community which is antagonistic towards this home community with the intent to cause them harm, yes, I believe that it is very reasonable, for that to be a judgment. Not that it had to happen, but that as a law, permitting it to occur. So if you're trying to kill me, I don't have the right to fight back, even if it meant that I have to kill you, right?
No, I disagree.
That's okay. You can disagree. We have time for questions. You can disagree. That's not a problem. That's okay. But we have to develop a universal standard for disagreement. You see, so we have to, and we'll come to that as well. Let me get through the lecture, and then I'll take one question. So I'm glad you all came, because don't feel any unease about asking me anything. I tell people that all the time, especially nowadays. All right, so the issue of validating, they will validate all standard opinions, so even if those opinions seem to be like unreasonable type of thing. Like, for instance, there's one school that says it's okay for Muslims to sell wine and pork to in non-Muslim countries, even though Islam outlaws the consumption of wine and pork. And so the rationale being that all those people are enemies of ours, so it doesn't matter, right? Right. And so, but some people without context, understanding the different worlds that existed, that world and this world, and so they try to continue to adopt that same rule without consideration of the change that has occurred in the world system. You see, so that is a problem that we do have. So hyperlegalism, especially as it relates to recorded legal history, and as mentioned, unintentionally minimizing the centrality of the prophet's role as exemplar par excellence. And so that was with regard to the scholars. Problem with scholars that I see. The problem with common Muslims is that Islam used to be, the definition of Islam used to be submission. Now Islam means peace. Right? So before 9/11, if you ask any Muslim, what does Islam mean? They say submission. And then you ask them now, what does Islam? Islam means peace. Submission is what Islam means. Submission to the will of God. That's what it means. Right? It may entail, the objective of it may be the fulfillment or the realization of peace in one's life and hopefully in one's world. Right, definitely, yeah, it does have a connection in terms of a goal of submission. But it, as a word, it means submission. And so this has led to a serious problem for common Muslims, because if you say Islam means peace, that also implies that you're saying Islam is a pacifist religion. But Islam is not a pacifist religion. I'll be very honest, it's not a pacifist religion. Right. Now, it's not an aggressive religion either, but it's not a pacifist religion. Islam allows for you to respond, to defend yourself. Is a religion that authorizes that. Now, one of the fundamental problems that is raised, or an issue that is raised at times, especially by non-Muslims, is that, well, okay, if or this idea that, okay, any religion that authorizes the use of violence can't be a true religion of God, right? I said, well, who said that? Did Jesus say that? I mean, did Buddha say that? Where does that come from? And even if you say that is the way that you determine a true religion, right? Then what happens to justice? What happens to justice at the end of the day? Now, I say, okay, well, you can never fight back. You can never fight or fight back. You can't initiate anything. You can't even defend yourself, right? And so you can come and walk over me, take my property, take my land, take my house. You can kill my wife. You can kill my children, and I'm not supposed to do anything, right? Not defense. Just let it happen, right? Right? No rational person would think that is an objective principle. That I don't think if any rational person, or most rational people, would accept it, even if they claim that they believe it. Like if someone punch you in your face, you automatically, your hand goes up. Even if you miss it, you don't block it. Your body reacts, right, to violence. So this is a challenge for Muslims. The saying that Islam, that is what it means. It's not a pacifist religion. And another thing that undermines the common Muslim claim is that there has been significant support shown by common Muslims for military intervention in Muslim countries. Right? So Islam means peace. Right? Then why am I supporting invasions of Muslim countries or other countries? Why am I supporting, right, Western intervention? So if it's about peace, I'm not supposed to have any opinion about it. I'm supposed to say, hey, well, I'm supposed to be against war, right? I'm supposed to be against violence. This undermines those claims. We reinforce positive stereotypes. I say, yeah, Muslims are good people. They're peaceful people, right? We love that, right? We wonder, oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, tell the truth about the Muslims. We say Muslims are violent. No, you shouldn't overgeneralize. They're not all Muslims are violent, right? So we love generalizations, overgeneralizations when they're good, but we don't like them when they're bad. No people like bad overgeneralizations. It's like if I say white people are racist, right? Nobody likes that, right? Nobody everybody loves, but if I say white people are wonderful, yeah, we like that. So it's the same. So at times we say, well, don't stereotype us, don't essentialize us, don't reinforce stereotypes about Muslims. But the moment we try to represent the entire community, and we start saying that they're not Muslim, what they say is not Islam, that implies that what I say is Islam, and I am the real Muslim, right? And I speak for Islam. So if you don't want people to stereotype you, then don't try to represent the entire community. Speak for yourself. That's it. We have diversity. That's it. We all read the same books. Violent Muslims, they find the violent portions of the Quran to justify their actions. Peaceful Muslims, they look at the peaceful parts to justify their actions. You see, but we just diverse community. We're all Muslims. I can't say who's not Muslim, who's not, who's not necessarily. And then this other issue, which I think is extremely important, that I alluded to already, is that we have accepted the definition or Islam as a religion. And it's important for us to understand the etymology or the history of that word and the concept, the sort of the philosophy that's connected with it. Because when we think about religion, automatically we're talking about a religion which is disassociated from state action, from political action. Extremely important for us to understand that religion was a word invented by the European colonialists, right? It's like civilization was another one of those words, culture was another one of those words. These words were invented as a way to justify their colonization of other peoples. Why, for instance, I go to a country or I go to a continent like Africa, for instance, they have no civilization. We have to give it to them. So I say religion is a real, true religion. It has to have this and that. It has to have the theology. It has to have the temple. It has to have this. And go, they don't have religion, right? We have to give it to them, right? And during that time, it was Christianity. We gave it. We have to give, So religion itself, especially when it's divorced from state, any sort of connection with the state, even though religion is always corrupted once it is connected with the state. When the state appropriates religion, it corrupts it, destroys it. You see, and so that is a problem. And so when we think about religion, I want you to have a read of this statement by Karen Armstrong, a British scholar, something she recently said. And so she said, we now take the secular state so much for granted that it is hard for us to appreciate its novelty. Since before the modern period, there were no secular institutions and no secular states in our sense of the word. Their creation required the development of an entirely different understanding of religion, one that was unique to the modern West. No other culture has had anything remotely like it, and before the 18th century, it would have been incomprehensible even to European Catholics. The words in other languages that we translate as religion invariably refer to something vaguer, larger, and more inclusive. The Arabic word deen signifies an entire way of life, and the Sanskrit dharma covers law, politics, and social institutions as well as piety. The Hebrew Bible has no abstract concept of religion, and the Talmudic rabbis would have found it impossible to define faith in a single word or formula, because the Talmud was expressly designed to bring the whole of human life into the ambit of the sacred. The Oxford Classical Dictionary firmly states, no word in either Greek or Latin corresponds to the English religion or religions. In fact, the only tradition that satisfies the modern Western criterion of religion as a purely private pursuit is Protestant Christianity, which, like other Western views of religion, was also a creation of the early modern period. So, taking that into consideration, again, when we come back to the word deen and change or kill anyone who changes the deen, it helps you to give you a somewhat of a better idea what was intended by that. So hopefully there'll be more to help us get some clarity. Now, when we ask the question of like, what is it that makes Islam violent? Well, let's say, assuming in the eyes of those who are among the non-initiated, first and foremost, because Islam teaches jihad, right? It endorses it, right? So there's this type of jihad which is military struggle. It's valid under the right circumstances. Jihad, because of apostasy laws, or because of corporal punishments for crimes like adultery, for slander, things like that. We find them in the Quran, for theft, or the very fact that the Quran sanctions fighting. That some people say, oh, there you go. Islam is violent. That's what makes it violent. But again, it reflects upon the very fact that, for one, the penal code only covers about 30 of over 6,000 verses of the Quran. And then the verses pertaining to fighting in jihad, they all have a context. They all are responses to certain situations that Muslims found themselves in. Now, among those things that people would say make Islam violent, or for instance, we witness beheadings, even though it has no association with Islam. There's nothing in Islam saying you're supposed to behead somebody if they insult Islam. It doesn't exist. So if it's not from Islam, then there's no reason for us to be talking about Islam is violent, if that is the basis of it. Same thing for mutilation, right? Genital mutilation. Islam doesn't say anything about genital mutilation. That's an African thing. It's an African cultural issue. It has nothing to do with Islam. It doesn't come from it, right? So when people continue to say that Islam, this is the source of that, then that itself is untrue. Torture, Islam, doesn't endorse torture. You find it sometimes. Collateral damage, that originates in the West. The world wars, collateral damage, that's where that originates from. The Muslims didn't make that up. That came from the West, the Western tradition. Collateral damage, you're just dropping bombs on just cities and civilians and everybody. That was from the West. Now Muslims may have appropriated it from the West, but Islam didn't teach that. That's not what Islam taught. Islam taught, you don't kill women, you don't kill children, you don't kill monks and rabbis, you don't kill the people who are civilians. You don't do that. That's what Islam taught. The Prophet Muhammad taught that. So that doesn't come from Islam. Terrorist violence as well. That's not from Islam. Religious compulsion. Again, there's a tradition there. But again, if we understand things in the right context, then there's no way, because the Quran is very clear that faith cannot be compelled. La ikraha fi din. There's no compulsion in religion. That if God has so willed, then everyone on earth would have believed. So will you then compel the people so that they will believe? When it is not for a soul to believe unless it be by God's permission. Right? So the Quran is very clear about you can't compel belief. It's a person that's an idiot to think that if you tell me you don't believe anymore, or you stop praying, for instance, and I say, you better pray, or you better believe, and I say, yeah, okay, I believe, I'm going to kill you if you don't believe, okay, I do, but in my heart, it doesn't have any weight with God. It has no weight with God. According to the Islamic teachings, if something is not done from with intentionality and willfully, God doesn't give reward credit to that person. That's what Islam teaches us. And then there's another question about, what is a Muslim? And this differs for Muslims, and it differs for non-Muslims. You have your idea of what a Muslim may be. Muslims have that idea of what a real Muslim is as well. Right? Sometimes we'll say that certain people are non-Muslims to distance ourselves from them. Sometimes because of the theological difference, certain people are non-Muslims. Sometimes because they're violent and it reflects negatively on us. We say they're not Muslims. But for many non-Muslims, it's your definition, a theological definition, is it an anthropological definition? Because often it's like, Muslims are those who say they're Muslim, but also what a Muslim may be is when you think of a Muslim, I'm quite sure that most of you, when you think Muslim, there's a certain image that appears in your minds, right? The Muslim has a certain look as well, right? The real Muslim, right? One of the people from over there, right? From over there, those brown people, right? Yeah, they come here trying to invade our country, trying to mess up our constitution and ruin our lives. They're trying to hurt us, right?
No. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah, for a lot of people, yeah, maybe for you, maybe not for you, maybe for you. Okay, maybe not for you, but for a lot of people. I've talked to non-Muslims, they told me yes. Yeah, so that's real. Huh?
I mean, knowing, like, my impression of Muslim is everyone who wants to be. It doesn't matter what they look like.
No, that's good. I think that's, that's what we hope to eventually will become. Like, for instance, when we talked about this idea of contextualizing Islam for the American public, that's one thing that we try to do, particularly when we handle these topics, is that we want to put an American face on Islam as well, a familiar face to you. We don't want you to feel, afraid, right? Uneasy. But unfortunately, the imagery we see constantly is always the image of again, one of those people. Even if they speak good English, it's like, but still, I can't relate, right? And a lot of people struggle with this. I know this. People are honest. Who've spoken to me who are not Muslim. They tell me this, right? So maybe perhaps certain people don't see it that way, but a lot of other people do. They do see it that way. So that's an important thing to consider. And so, if, for instance, if your image of a Muslim is a certain color, a certain look, hair texture, or whatever, then again, we have to ask ourselves if our fears are rooted in a theological difference or a more, you understand? It's something from our history, right? That, because sometimes we have to challenge ourselves too. It's not always their fault, right? Sometimes it's something within us that we haven't yet really dealt with, right? Honestly and sincerely. In America still today, it's proved that up to 80% of whites in America still only live amongst whites. Right? In America still today. Right? And it's also statistically proven that when people interact with other people unlike themselves more often, that they develop a more familiarity with them, and those sort of biased opinions that they have of them, they change, they're altered. This is well established. They've done these types of studies with blacks and whites, and and it happens with in anthropology. It's well established that is the case. So those are some things to think about as well. And then this is an important question, I think. Does ideology radicalize? Because what is being promoted at times is the idea that it's because, for instance, does Islam promote violence, right? So if Islam does promote violence, then we have to do something about Islam, right? Not just the Muslims, we have to do something about Islam. We have to reform it. We have to promote a type of Islam that produces people who are not serious about their religion anymore, as was stated by one of the anti-Islam antagonists. They're not serious about Islam, right? So we have to do something about the religion. We have to change the ideology, because we think that the ideology is what radicalizes people. And in making this claim, what we do fundamentally, again, we take ourselves out of the equation. That it's their fault. They have to change, not us. We didn't do anything wrong. We're just trying to help. We're trying to, bring them civilization, right? We're just trying to make them civilized people, So we have to, so they have to change. We didn't do anything wrong to them. But when realistically we look at, when we even look at ISIS, where did they come from? Islam didn't produce ISIS. Conditions on the ground produce ISIS. Right? Invasion of a country produced ISIS, and a bunch of other countries as well produced ISIS, created a vacuum, right? Regime change. People were, total governments were removed, and all of a sudden you have ISIS, right? We support things, so we can't forget about that as well. Now, James Gilligan, who actually teaches at NYU right now, used to be the he actually in the past used to, I forgot the name of the institute connected with Harvard, but he has decades of experience in psychiatry. And he has a number of series of books entitled Violence. And so, and James Gilligan's opinion is that violence in people is a response to injustice, or a response to a perceived injustice. Now, this idea actually it accords with some of the mystical teachings of Muslim, sort of amongst the mystics of Islam. Like, for instance, one of our scholars, Shaykh Abdullah, in his book, he mentions that anger, or that the source of anger, or the reason that people get angry, is because they see themselves. And what it means by that is that when someone offends you, disrespects you, your reaction is because you feel you don't deserve that type of treatment, right? And so when someone tramples on your ego, you become angry, right? If a violent husband, right, feels that his wife is not being respectful enough of him, he will beat her, right? Right? So it's rooted in this idea of the sense of justice or imperceived justice. And now I'm going to get justice for myself or for others. And so people become violent on that basis. And he also said that in America, that violence should be treated as a public health issue. Right? It should be treated as a public health issue. It's epidemic. And so, for instance, in America, we have in 2012, we had a population of about 313 million people. The FBI statistics in the same year have reported that in America there were over 1 million violent attacks, right, in America. So the question is like, okay, what was it that made these people commit violence? Was it religion? Was it something else, right? Why are they so violent? Why are they killing people? Why are they hurting people, right? So, but that's our state here in America. Now, how many Muslims exist in the world?
1.6 billion.
It's like 1.3, 1.5, different numbers, billion, right? ISIS are how many people, do they say? Some people say, sometimes you're 5,000, you're 30,000, you have different numbers. Out of 1.5 billion, right? Who's more violent? Again, I'm not saying that, that we inherently violent.
Violence is not the same.
Huh?
It's a different kind of violence.
But still violence. Is it still violence?
Shooting in
No.
school.
Why is it not?
The degrees of violence. Violence is not one thing. Violence is not a binary state. It's 0 and 1. The degrees of violence. You gotta put it in that context.
Okay. I'll come back to that. We'll come back to that. We're going to open up Q&A pretty soon. But I'm almost finished. I disagree, but we'll come back to that. But here, this is what we have. We haven't even talked about American military violence. Since 1911, how many? Bombed over 100 times in more than 30 countries. This is a list of some of them. You don't have to read through all of them. You get an idea. Continues. What does it say? The greatest purveyors of violence in the world are state actors. Not Muslims. State actors are the greatest purveyors of violence in the world. Did Islam make violent Muslims? Here's a quote from a man by the name of Graham Fuller. Who was he? He was the vice chairman of the National Intelligence Council at the CIA. This is taken from his book, A World Without Islam, wherein he argues that even if you get rid of Islam in the world, you're still going to have the same problems. Because the fundamental problems of the world are not religious in nature. They're political, they're economic, among other things. There's been a historical antagonism between Eastern and Western Europe. That's why we call it the West. Not because of the Middle East. The Middle East is not the East. The East is Eastern Europe. Like today, Russia represents the East, and the UK and France, they represent the West. Right? And then you have the Byzantines and whatever. There's a history there. But this is what he said. He said, ultimately, the burden of ending terrorism falls upon Muslim populations themselves. But for this to happen, there must first be an end to the conditions that foster this radicalism and that generate widespread anti-Americanism. In bluntest terms, that means no more foreign boots on the ground in Muslim countries and no more foreign military attacks by foreign soldiers, images that remain daily fare on all the television screens of the world except in America itself. Muslim societies must be given a chance to calm down and return to a state of normalcy. Secondly, only Muslims themselves can begin to change thinking in their own societies to truly fight terrorism. And I feel funny quoting someone from the CIA. Okay. But this is what our own law enforcement officers are saying. So lastly, so who's violent? People aren't born violent, but can be born into violence. All violent people look to justify their violence somewhere. Violent Muslims often look for religious justifications. So what's yours? So now it's time for a Q&A.
If I may. First of all, I would like to sincerely apologize for speaking out of turn. I have to respond.
You were asked a question. You weren't speaking out of turn.
I would like to sincerely apologize for speaking out of turn. The only reason I kept speaking was because I felt I needed to justify what I said. Second, I would like to thank you for your time and for addressing this very sensitive issue, especially in a culture that isn't primarily Islamic. All right. And third, I would like to say that though it does not matter whatsoever, I'm Christian, technically a Methodist, one little sect of Christianity. And there's a lot more I'd like to say as well, but I don't want to monopolize I appreciate the conversation. So I would like to address what initially interrupted you, and no offense to anyone that may have or anything like that, but I think it's very important that we take a step back and we relax and realize that it really isn't about religion whatsoever. It's about my heart is beating really fast right now. And that's because of my passion about everything, whether it be music, whether it be humanity, and so forth. But just to address that subject, I want to remind everyone that we all came from the same place. And when living in an ancient society, we lived in tribes that were very precarious in their ability to survive. And you can take that same thing and bring it to the modern world. Like if there is a deserter from any military, it is a very dangerous thing for that deserter to go to the other side and take information. We have it, whether it's an American military and they're like a whistleblower, things like that, or it's very, very dangerous. And if you are in a place that isn't a powerful military, you're a tribe of a few hundred people, if someone does leave and they know how many soldiers you have protecting your family and things like that, I can't say that it's justifiable to kill anyone, but I can understand how that is understandable. And that's really all I can say about that. And if I could just a little bit longer to say that this has nothing to technically do with religion, because Christianity, Judaism, or Islam, or all of the other minor, let's say, no offense to them, religions in the world have a universal meaning. And anything that changes from the truth, which is, love, peace, growth, and progress forward, is the corruption of human and the need for power. And it happens in Christianity, Islam, or in Judaism. And that's all I have to say.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. I actually had a couple of things to say. As far as people getting to know you and then liking you and thinking of you in a positive way, we have to admit that even at that point, when you're Muslim and they're non-Muslims, there are perceived theological differences. Whether they're true or not, they are there.
Right.
So we have to actually contend with that and try and explain the differences. And there is a big movement now in some countries in the Middle East whereby they're looking at all of the things that you've discussed, but they're also making a real effort into a better understanding of the issues. And I'll give you one example. The whole issue of the apostasy, the whole issue behind killing those who come out of the religion. My heart is pounding as well because I'm very passionate. But the whole thing is, during the Prophet time, like you said, so many verses in the Quran does not allow for killing those who leave the religion. However, that was during the Khulafa, after the Prophet died, when we had the Ridda battle. And that was not about leaving Islam. That was about refusing to pay the taxes or the zakah or whatever it is that they had to pay. And when the Prophet died, they refused to pay it. So it was really an economic issue. It was not a religion issue. Because in Islam, there is no compulsion in religion, and we're not supposed. But they took that action of that war, and they made it seem like, and of course, a lot of people don't understand the basics or the foundation, and so they say, yeah, anybody who leaves Islam should be killed. Ridda was not about leaving Islam. That's
okay, yeah, if you can, I mean, I appreciate the comments, and I want to make sure that people get a chance to actually ask a question as well. But I definitely appreciate that. Yes, sir.
Sir, I have two questions. First, are you Shia or Sunni? How can you explain this violence done by Sunnis to Shia at this moment, and before probably was reversed?
Yeah, my grounding is in the Sunni tradition, so that would probably make me Sunni. Right? But that doesn't mean that I'm a fanatical Sunni. That I don't give consideration to the possibility of some truth originating from the Shiites. In terms of the violence between Sunnis and Shiites, I mean, there is in certain cases a level of fanaticism, but ultimately you're talking about struggles for power. The Sunnis were in charge at one time, and then in Iraq, for instance, and then now the Shiites are in charge. And this is actually one of the reasons that ISIS has been able to sort of mobilize so many different people, because ISIS and they're mobilizing Sunnis, right? In particular against the Shiite regime in Iraq, because they pretty much locked the Sunnis out of power. So much of it is about power and not so much about religion. And now religion has been exploited, right? It's been sort of magnified as a reason for us to be against you, right? But ultimately, these are more deeper sort of political, economic, and social causes of those type of clashes. I mean, I know plenty of Sunnis who are married to Shiites. Most Muslims are like most people, that people are not concerned with power. They're concerned with stability in their lives. They're concerned with living well. They're concerned with feeling safe. You see, that's most people on the planet. You see, and it's just the politicians themselves are always, for instance, we have in the Muslim world, we have a so-called Sunni regime in Saudi Arabia and a so-called Shiite regime in Iran, and they themselves are major players in a lot of these conflicts in that part of the world. Like in Egypt as well, it's very clear that the Saudis had a very strong hand in what happened in Egypt in terms of the overthrow of Morsi. So, because right after Morsi was deposed and then Sisi took over, that Saudi Arabia and some other Emirate states, they filled their banks with billions of dollars. So it's very clear, that their religion is utilizing as a tool to achieve political aims, and so the rest of us just happen to be pawns at the end of the day. So we just have to just wake up and realize that no person wakes up wanting to go out and kill somebody just because, because you're different, And so, and to say something about the matter of acknowledging or understanding one another's beliefs, and there will be theological differences between Muslims and Christians when we speak. Of course, they're assumed, but if we are true believers in the religions that we believe in, and if I'm comfortable in my faith, why should I have to feel threatened by you? I mean, especially knowing that that your belief, the way you believe in God, is between you and God. Ultimately, it's like God's going to reckon you for that. What I can't force you to believe what I believe. And you can't force me to believe what you believe. No, you can threaten me. You want me to confess it? Yeah, I will. You tell me, I'll blow your brains out if you don't believe in Christ. Oh, yeah, I'll do it. But in my heart, I don't believe it. Doesn't mean anything at the end of the day. So we have to understand that much, is that through conviction, not through compulsion. So, and one of the ways, and I'll say this last thing before I move on to the next questioner, is that one thing that I don't like the way, about the way we do interfaith dialogue in this time, is that we typically, we do it in such a way where we continue to objectify one another. That we're coming together to understand one another's religion, right? You understand the Quran, you understand the Bible, understand your beliefs. And I think that in itself leads us to objectify. We otherize one another at the end of the day. We really don't know enough about one another, because religion is not the only thing that defines me. It's not the only thing that defines me. You know, my gender defines me. My ethnic background defines me. My history, you know, my family history defines me. You know, that my social class, my economic class, it defines me. It has an effect on who I am, you see. So, I mean, why can't sometimes we have conversations about why do you think is the best way to raise a child? Okay. I mean, you found that we have similar values in terms of, like, you know, what we're trying to protect our children from. You know, what about the game? You know, the other night. You know, what about the fight? I mean, you can talk about a number of different things, you know, that normal people talk about. Why do we have to only talk about religion? We are only going to talk about religion. At the end of the day, you just say, you know what, it was pointless, because so now I know if I really want to understand you, all I have to do is read the Bible. Now I understand everything about it. Listen, I read the Bible. You know, but this doesn't work that way. So we have to change that. We have to start being very honest. That's why I encourage you, go and ask whatever you say, disagree. Listen, look, we can agree to disagree. It's okay. Right. I'm sorry, I believe that there was this young man here.
Yeah. Okay. My question is about just some verses in the Quran about military jihad and just how you address it. I've read multiple scholarships how they talk about after war when they could take the captives as slaves, and the female slaves would become sexually lawful to the master. So both scholars, one didn't like make this conclusion, but another one did. Like, this implies that the Quran condoned rape, because I'm assuming that it wasn't consensual. So how do you kind of address these verses?
Well, you address it according to its historical context. That slavery was an international system. It was understood by all peoples that it was possible that if women were taken captive, then that was one thing that would occur. You know, I mean, it's hard for us to imagine the world that those people occupied, they lived in. You know? And of course, we can assume that, okay, they resisted. You know, perhaps it did happen at times. But on the other hand, we can also assume that maybe they didn't. But just understanding, hey, well, I am among the spoils of war. This is just what happens, you know, for people like me, like us at times. And so Islam came in that it came in that type of world, you see, and so although that was the case, and although we still have those verses in the Quran, there still is no reason to believe that this would ever return universally, right? Because of the type of sensibilities that people have today. That yes, it is there, right? And it was accepted in the world during that time as a moral way to have intercourse, you know, and there are certain rules that are involved with that, and so yeah, it's something there, but you have to understand something as well too, which is that people of faith are not waiting for the approval of people who don't believe in the faith. You see what I'm saying? You know, so certain things I can sit here and try to explain them to you, try to justify them to you. It won't be enough for you. Well, but because I believe in this religion, right, with all of its dynamism, right, that I can appreciate that faith has value, right? That faith has value as well. Now we have our rationalist traditions as well. Our rational traditions, they are there. And we try to explain everything, try to say the reason why this is okay is because of this. You know, but on a certain level as well, we also have our anti-rational, anti-philosophical traditions too, which both are placed under the umbrella of the Islamic, you know, sort of ethical tradition, you see. And so at times, you know, we don't know why God allows something, you know. But we trust God. God knows best. He has a wisdom, in allowing certain things. If I try to explain to you why Muslims pray the way that we do, and why 5 times a day, why at those times, why this number of units, why bowing, why prostrate, I can't tell you why. All I know is that God said do it, and I do it. You see, because that's what faith is about. Faith is about vulnerability. Faith is about some degree of doubt. This idea is hope. We worship God on fear and hope, right? Meaning that we put ourselves in a vulnerable position. That once we feel we have certainty about things, this is when this becomes dangerous. Realistically, when I'm certain God is going to forgive me, I'm certain that I'm going to hell, right? Right. That's when it becomes dangerous. You see, but faith is not really about certainty. Faith is about trust. And when you trust God in particular, then you have to be willing to accept that although you don't understand, the wisdom in something, that ultimately there's some good in it. So that's really what faith was entailed with faith. So that's really all I can say about that issue, is that it was part of a system that was in place. It was universally acknowledged. The West acknowledged it. It was a practice in the West. Slavery in Islam wasn't like slavery in Europe, and in the Americas. It was not. It was much more humane, far much more humane than, and it wasn't limited to blacks as well. So it was something. It was much different. But that exists there, and I don't believe that anything I can anywhere I justify, I try to explain to you, you probably won't feel that is sufficient of an explanation. So I just would say that that's one of those things that we take on faith as Muslims. And some Muslims some Muslims do have a problem with that. I will admit that. But that's what faith is about. It's a struggle. That's what Islam is, submission. You submit your will to God. If there's no struggle in it, then there's it's probably a problem. I'm sorry. You were next.
Have you had the opportunity or occasion to sit in a colloquy like this, except with an audience or a conversation partner who has some of the absolutist views about Islam that you've talked about here? And what is that like for you when you encounter someone such a fundamentalist cast of mind that they have a view of Islam that you don't think is supported?
So you're talking about when I'm with a Muslim who's somewhat of an absolutist, has an absolutist type of mentality, fundamentalist type of mentality.
It's about non-Muslim.
Oh, you're non-Muslim. You're talking about non-Muslim or Muslim?
No, you said Muslim.
Right, Muslim. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So, I mean, with people who are that way, you learn. Sometimes some of us learn the hard way, and others, we actually take the advice of our elders, and we get wisdom early, but some, of course, the unwise way is for you to try to engage the person, try to reason with them, and often you can't reason with a person who has an absolutist, fundamentalist type of mentality, you see, but so you can just say, I agree to disagree, and you just move on. That's the wise approach. That's the way we feel about it, or you have to find someone that person respects, that hopefully can talk some sense into them. And so typically if I do come across the type of people, which I don't come across very often, I generally just don't argue with them. I let them say their piece, and I just keep going. I give you an example. I remember I had written an essay some years ago about a particular way of praying, and it was posted on the internet. And I remember I was in Philadelphia and went to one of the clothing stores, and a Muslim guy, absolutist in his thinking, came up behind me and he says, "Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh, how you doing?" And he said, "Hey, do you know why people pray like this?" Now I know he knows that I wrote something about this, and I know he's trying to just sort of bait me into an argument, So I said to him, he said, "So they have any evidence for that?" I said, "Yeah, they have evidence." And so he said, "Well, wait, what is it? What is it?" "Oh, you got to check the internet." And that was it. The conversation was over. You can check the internet, some stuff on the internet, and I walked out, So, but some people were like, "Well, yeah, what are you talking about? Yeah, this is this evidence," and they'll engage with the person for a long time and waste their time with them, because a lot of those people are not trying. Their minds are already made up. They only want you to listen to them. You see, and but again, I've had some experiences like that, but not with most Muslims. Most Muslims that I come in contact with, they're not like that. Yes. Alaikum salam.
I have a couple of things that I wanted to address. One, the question that the gentleman had up there, are you Sunni or Shia? And my response, as you were saying, what's the difference? What does that mean to you to even ask the question? What do you even know about the difference between Sunni and Shia? I'm going to try to quote what Malcolm said, obviously many years ago. He didn't say this part. I'm saying I'm an African American Muslim woman who travels a lot. I do media. I'm in radio and television. And he said, when we as black people are judged in America and probably all over the world, it doesn't matter whether you are Muslim, Christian, Jewish, or Black Hebrew, whether you are Democrat or Republican, or many other things he said. What they're looking at is your black skin. And I say, as I travel, driving or living while black, flying while Muslim, and in my case, being a woman, you didn't ask me the question, so what do you think about the World Series right now? Because you think that I may not even be interested, or you may not even ask that because that's not in your purview, but it's in mine. And so I think about even the show when you said interfaith. Our show is called Perspectives of Interfaith, but we're not just trying to find out from people what their why they're Christian or why they're Muslim or why they're Buddhist or Sikh or Baha'i or anything like that. Our show really it's to dispel the myths and stereotypes of various faith traditions so that our viewers get a better idea of exactly what you were presenting, or what does it mean to be Buddhist, or what does it mean to be an atheist, for that matter. I would like, now that I've said all that I wanted to say, more or less, my question is, as I'm getting ready to travel, I'm leaving for Palestine and Israel this weekend for 2 weeks. What would be your suggestion in terms of some of the people that I'm going to be meeting? I'm not going alone, I'm going with a delegation, an interfaith delegation of African Americans. What would you advise in terms of the, let's say, some of the Israeli Zionists, not the activists, but those that are definitely going to be coming from a different perspective, for me to be able to temper myself?
I mean, it's hard to advise you on that because I've never been there myself. But I would definitely, first and foremost, just say, obey the laws. Be careful. Right? You're there for a visit. Right? You're not coming there to live. The people there know their reality better than you do. And watch what they do and how they handle things, and let them lead in their context. I think that's important. Yes, sir.
To return to the theme of violence, two simple questions. What, in your opinion, is the appeal of ISIS for young people around the world? That's an important question. Second, you have posited the conflict between Sunni and Shia largely in terms of political facts, who is in power. But if the other team the other group is in power, why should I have to meet them with violence, with beheading, with blowing them up, with killing? That applies both to the Shia and the Sunni. There seems to be a strain of violence on both sides. Would you speak to that?
Yeah, well, the first question about what the appeal of ISIS is to youth. again, part of it is because there is a historical tradition about the concept of khilafah to begin with. And it is found in a lot of our legal books. There are some groups who have been preaching the return to the khilafah or reestablishment of the khilafah and the idea of a nation state, Muslim nation state theocracy or whatever, for a very long time. So a lot of young Muslims have bought into that particular vision. And so when they see this happening in that part of the world, especially taking into consideration all the other conflict that's happening around it, and they're reading material about the end of times and those types of things, we speak about the army of the Mahdi and those types of things, that those are some of those things that attract them to go join the battle with ISIS. That's one part of it. The other part of it too is that a lot of those people who are in favor of establishing an independent Muslim state, independent of the West, are people who are who feel a bit disoriented or disenfranchised in Western societies themselves. One, because of them witnessing Western countries destroy and kill and maim Muslims for a number of decades, and then also because many times a lot of these people in their own societies are marginalized themselves. Like for instance, in England, you find a very high percentage of the Indo-Pakistani population who, in some ways, reflect the relationship between blacks and the American system over there. So when we look at the prison population, the percentage of those who are in prison over there, so someone told me, I didn't verify the statistic, but it was told when I was there last year that it was up to almost 85% of those in prison are from Indo-Pakistani heritage. And so in America we have something similar to that. It's not that high a percentage, but it's like at least about it is pretty high, this percentage of African Americans in prison in America, even though we don't make up that significant amount of the population. So you have those issues happening in societies that help to radicalize those individuals, you see. So that's the first part of the question. So the second part, in terms of like why respond with such violence, these people have been living in war zones for, since who knows how long. You understand? Afghanistan has been how many wars? They've never recovered from the early 20th century. They've been through a number of wars, invasions. You find in Iraq, since the first the Gulf War in the 90s, early 90s, that these people have been in a state of war. And so war produces very extreme types of individuals, you see, that you can be born into violence. You understand? I mentioned that before. You can be born into violence. People are born into violence. The Palestinians are born into violence. They're living in refugee camps. They're being denied certain types of goods and medicine. They've been, persecuted at the borders. That eventually somebody loses it, you see. So unlike our own people here, and in particular, when I say our own people, we're talking about like the mainstream, the sort of white culture, those people from our mainstream culture. Like when one of our young kids commits an act of violence, we don't talk about like, what was his religion, right? Did he learn it in church? We start asking questions like, what happened to little Johnny, at home? It must have been, we start questioning psychological state. What were the conditions that made him go crazy? Right? We look for answers that we don't start talking about religion. But Muslims all of a sudden we say, well, it's religion. Yeah. He's beheading somebody because of his religion. No, why can't it simply be because conditions have been created for him on the ground that made him violent? Right? But who caused that? Who created those conditions? Muslims didn't create those conditions. Right? And so we have to bear part of the blame as well. Right? So you understand? So that's my answer to both of those issues, and I hope that at least some of it is satisfactory. Yes.
Just very quickly before your question, I just want to mark that it's 8:30, and there's usually an hour and a half is usually the point where people start getting tired, and so I just want to I want to leave this conversation open, but maybe if what we can do is to move toward the conclusion of the event, and then people can come and informally ask questions. If there are people who have a question, and I emphasize the term question, You know, and they feel that, you know, you can't, if you leave without asking this question, you'll you'll be very sad. Then I want you to.
So I do 4 more.
Yeah, so if you have that sort of question, maybe ask it, and we'll take the question first.
All right.
You know, and so you'll maybe have to take a mental note of what the questions are, and then we can finish. So if you have that sort of question,
I have a 5-word question.
Okay, ask your 5-word question.
He had his hand up.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Quick question. This is too little time to do this big topic. Why did you do it?
Okay. All right.
Well,
So
it's a start. It's a start.
okay, that's good. Another question.
Mine was a comment, actually. The question that was asked here about the division between Shia and Sunni. I understand it's present in a few places, but I'm going to just mention Iraq in particular, where we see the divide very strong. At the time of before the U.S. invasion of Iraq, my understanding was that the percentage of Iraqi Sunni and Shia who married each other was, I believe, 1/3 or even higher. Right now, it's almost none. And if you actually really understand what happened, or go back to what happened during the war, basically the U.S. used the Shia to control Iraq. And at the same time, they pushed the Sunni aside, and I mean, that's clear, honestly. And then they brought in a Shia government that is extreme, that actually should not be supported by anyone. It's a dictatorship. It's an oppressive regime like any other oppressive regime in the area, or maybe even worse. And then, of course, how can we not expect a divide not to happen? It's not like we want the divide to happen, but if we really look at how it happened, we would understand.
Right.
And now Iraq is in a mess. So whatever happens in Iraq, I myself will not be surprised. So that's just
all right. Thank you.
Questions? Yes, sir.
Yes. Is the term infidel something that is a modern language creation, or is it rooted in Muslim teaching?
Yes.
My question is, I think you said that there's no verse in the Quran that advocates beheading of unbelievers. I'm not Muslim, obviously, probably, and I have not read the Quran, but I have read specifically that that's not true.
Okay, you should show me the verse, and we can settle the issue.
Surah 47.
Surah 47, verse what? Which verse?
I don't know what the verse is. The translation is, when you encounter the unbelievers on the battlefield, strike off their heads until you have crushed them completely. That's a translation. It's a mistranslation?
Yeah, that in itself, that itself could be taken literally. It could be taken literally. You're true, but like that is an expression that's utilized in the Arabic language just to mean to kill, to kill them, not necessarily to literally to cut their heads off. Right now, some people have interpreted it that way. Yeah? So it's true. That's a good example, But in the traditional exegesis, it's simply an expression to about killing, And there's no history, no sort of historical record, or historical maiming and things like that. We call musla in Arabic language, or tanseeb, is strictly prohibited in Islam, where you actually dismember people. It's prohibited. So that expression is simply it just means an expression Arabs utilize as a way to kill, because the most guaranteed way to kill somebody is cut off their head. Just like you say, you blow out somebody's brain, blow out their brains. They say cut off your head. I'm going to blow your brains out. If I shoot you in the heart, still the intention is to kill. You see, and you don't find that in Islamic history. Reports of anything during the Prophet's time or anyone after them, people cutting off people's heads on a regular basis. There were instances of that, like the Prophet's grandson, his head was cut off by his enemies. But this was not a regular practice for Muslims throughout Islamic history.
Thank you.
Is waterboarding allowed in Islam?
Form of torture, right?
Okay, my question is this. In a war zone where there is no law and order, no police, no law, we can expect violence, we can expect killing.
Can you imagine what will happen if New York City, all the police department is gone, electricity is gone? What will happen? Can you contrast and compare?
Yeah. Okay, well, I mean, yeah, so what's the last question? So that was two, there's three, one more question. Yes, sir.
Sir, I want to say something about beheading. When Mahdi took Khartoum in Sudan, they beheaded General Gordon, who was from British Army, and put his head on some sort of, stick, and this head was there for exhibition. Then they have, I'm not saying that, but it was a sort of tradition to bury, but I'm not saying that this was a reason, let's say that this is a traditional way to kill, but it happened.
Yeah, I didn't say it didn't happen.
Mussolini's body was hung for days.
Yeah.
Okay, one last question.
You go ahead, great question.
It's my first encounter listening about Islam. You've got a tough crowd. I have a real question, not a statement. I'm sensing some kind of crisis between interpretations. And I understand that some people interpret things which coming from really ancient times. Is there any authority within Islam academia, theological academia, which trying to work those misinterpretations that you made? And is this authority may become at some point of time powerful enough to express this as a kind of generalized opinion and somehow to diffuse discussions about beheading, killing, because we're sitting in the room talking about, if you would say, not religion, but tradition. So my question to you, is there some kind of development?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there are a number of institutions who are working hard for that. We have some national institutions who have been leading efforts. The institution I work for is Daytona College. Many of our leaders, our founders, they're definitely working in that field. What we do with is line post production. I mean, this is part of that effort that you're witnessing right now. So yeah, I believe that there's a lot of hope and a lot of potential that it will eventually have that effect. But I don't think that it will have the necessary effect if those on the other side who feel that they need to be convinced don't feel that they have to be mature as well. You see, because I think that if you demand from me to apologize for what someone else did, that's immature, in my opinion. Because I wouldn't judge you by something your brother did. And so if your brother did it, your brother did it. And I'm not going to say it was your fault. And so you should apologize for your brother or whatever, your third uncle, whatever it may be. That we don't, and this is fundamentally what was being demanded of Muslims, is that we've been asked to apologize for what people we don't even know are doing. You see. Oftentimes we don't even know if they're Muslims. You see, we're doing this. If there's some type of plot, we don't know. You see, oftentimes. So we've been asked to do that, and in the meantime, the true causes of those conflicts and these very unstable conditions in these particular areas have not been caused ultimately by Muslims. They've been caused by people from our own country or from our allies. And so what happens is we are able to say, we have no hand in that. Why are they killing each other? No, you did it. Partially you did it. Because you went and invaded and removed their rulers, you destroyed their government. That's why they're doing it. You see, it's not because of Islam. Otherwise, then all the Muslims in the world would be doing it. Why are Muslims not doing it? So don't keep telling me that it's Islam when you can see clearly that it's something else. Because we don't want to put blame on ourselves. And lastly, with regard to the question of police presence in neighborhoods or the existence of it, I don't personally believe that you require police in order for a society to actually thrive and to be safe. I mean, one of the sort of theories about
humane religion is that about, at least those that have very strong moral emphasis, is that people eventually police themselves. You know, they don't require the police. And in the suburbs, the most the richest neighborhoods, they don't have police driving around all the time. They don't. You see, why? Because these people are considered to be more civilized. You know, so they don't want the police around. You don't want you come in my business and invading my privacy as well. You know, and so I don't believe that that's really necessary for that to occur. And there was one point I want to make at the end. This last point. Oh yeah, about statistics. This last thing about statistics. Now, we've said that, okay, well, is this meaning Muslims, the social percentage of Muslims who believe that that apostates should be killed? Now, how do we understand statistics? Okay, now the common Muslims are represented by the learned community. Now, if I become a Muslim, in becoming a Muslim, I'm accepting things I know and things that I don't know. I believe in the Quran, or I believe in the Sunnah of the Prophet, you know, and I don't know everything about Islam. So if you ask me a question, you know, about Islam, you know, what do you think? My answer that I give to you is going to be based upon what I'm told by my the learned people. Now, if I agree with that belief, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm walking around looking for apostates. You're apostates, that it doesn't mean that. I mean, because you can take all types of statistics, types of polls. You can take, you know, how many Muslims believe you're supposed to pray 5 times a day? Oh my God, you can take it for almost anything. But does it mean that Muslims pray? All Muslims pray? No. There are plenty of Muslims who don't pray. There are Muslims who drink in the Muslim world. You know, they're not. You know, nobody's beating them. Nobody's killing them because they're not praying. Nobody's reporting them. You know, you have all types of situations like that. So that's important for us to understand about when we hear those particular types of numbers. You know, that they don't necessarily mean what they appear to mean, whether we agree with the particular opinion about things. So we can't be guilty of a thought crime. You see, so what people make us guilty of a thought crime, and so we have to change our thinking, change our beliefs. Why? To make you feel safer. So why do I have to? Why is only me? Why do I only have to change? Why don't you have to change as well? Why can't it be a mutual thing? Why is it? Why am I only guilty and you're not guilty as well? You see, you know, if you're judging me without knowing me, why am I guilty? Right. If you want to mistreat me because you don't understand me, you disagree with my religion, why am I guilty of that? If you don't want to talk to me, why am I guilty? Because you don't want to talk to me, you don't feel like. So those are some things I would like to just leave you with, and hopefully this is the start of a very wonderful conversation. Hopefully we get another opportunity to do this, and hopefully there's some benefits. So I bid my farewell to you. I wish you the best and peace.
Well, before you all leave, I just want to thank Shaykh Abdullah for taking the time out to come all the way from California and be with us and address this issue and take all these questions. And I know that this is a very complex and a very sensitive conversation. And so I know that, as Shaykh Abdullah was saying, that in some ways this is the beginning of a conversation. You know, Shaykh Abdullah lives in California. We hope he comes back often. But on this campus and in Princeton, you all should know, and you all do know, you know, there's a Muslim chaplain, there's a Muslim community, there's a lot of Muslims around, so you can continue the conversations between yourselves. And certainly there's a lot of conversation to be had. Please do keep in touch with the program. Sign up on our email list so we can keep in touch with you. And we have these circles of knowledge. For example, we do Quran study reading. It's open to anyone. And so if you would like to come and do Quran study reading with us and ask questions, you're more than welcome to do that. And we have other circles of knowledge on a weekly basis and all these lecture series on a monthly basis. So look forward to seeing you often. And please keep in touch. And have a nice evening. Thank you.